July 18, 2018 meeting of the Woodbridge Township Board of Education will come to order. Mr. Secretary, will you please note that Ms. Bourdain will not be here this evening due to a family emergency. Roll call, please, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Delapietro?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Here.
And Mr. Treebwasser.
Here. Mr. Secretary, as required by the Sunshine Law, please read the notice of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. January 10th, 2018 and July 10th, 2018, emailed to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office, posted in Avenel Middle School and the Board of Education Administration Building.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Delapietro, please read the closed session statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. In compliance with the Sunshine Law, the board must go into closed session in order to discuss subjects exempted from the public portion of our meeting. The discussions to be held in closed session will be regarding personnel matters. Additionally, the board will receive attorney-client advice regarding the matter of Woodbridge Board of Education versus the School Ethics Commission. Any information regarding the closed session discussion will be released to the public when the reasons for discussing these matters in closed session no longer exist.
I have a motion by Mr. Delapietro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Molnar. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. We'll retire to closed session and return as soon as we are complete. Thank you. Please rise for a salute to the flag and a moment of silence. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have a motion to reconvene?
So motion.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Delapietro?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Present.
Mr. Sedana?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Here.
And Mr. Treebwasser.
Here, will someone make a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meetings? So motion. I
Second.
have a motion by Mr. Sedana and a second by Mr. Delapietro. Are there any additions or corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record any notice of bids received by the board.
Thank you, Mr. President. On July 6, 2018, PD 19-14, Food Service Equipment Repairs, District-Wide, Time and Materials. July 13, 2018, PD 19-12, Asbestos Abatement and Microbial Remediation, District-Wide, Time and Materials. And July 13, 2018, PD 19-13, Security Cameras at Select Schools.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record any communications or reports received by the board.
Mr. President, on July 2nd, 2018, a thank you note from the Woodbridge High School student Christina Amaravi, recipient of the Andrew Mako Scholarship Award. And on July 13th, 2018, a thank you note from Woodbridge High School student Sarah Kuznirak, recipient of the Mildred and Josephine Camilleri Award.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. At this time, the board would like to conduct an open public hearing to discuss the proposed random alcohol and other drug policy 5131.8. If you wish to say something, please come to the microphone, provide your name and area of the township where you reside. Please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D. Just to give everybody a little insight to this, we had several meetings with the public. We had many opinions, and we had a lot of very good suggestions. So the reason we're doing this as a first reading is because we took a lot of those comments, a lot of those questions and concerns, and we made sure that this policy is reflective of that. So please feel free to come up and speak if you care to.
David Pinkowitz, Island. Before I talk, I'm just a little concerned. I didn't hear the opening of the meeting, so I don't know if there was a justification given. But the standard meeting notice still states that the public session won't begin until 7 p.m. And the notice that talked about this meeting specifically did not say that that wouldn't apply, just said that closed session would happen right away. So I am concerned that there are people here or that won't be here until 7 o'clock. So I'm not sure that I agree that you started when you did, which is 20 minutes early. That said, I'll get on to my comments. But like I said, I am concerned that the meeting, and you can go on your website, says, you know, the usual 7 o'clock for public session. As you know, as the board knows, I don't agree with this policy for a couple of reasons. But the biggest issue is that there's some studies that show that it probably won't even work. So we're doing a policy for no reason other than to make people feel better, but I'm not convinced it's going to do anything to help any student whatsoever in this district. I'm also very concerned, and I still remain concerned, that parents weren't given adequate notice and time during the school year itself to discuss this. You know, Mr. Molnar brought up at the very end of the last meeting to the superintendent, didn't we have meetings? The reality is there were meetings about a drug forum, but there were no meetings announced in advance that we were discussing a proposed drug policy. Maybe Mr. Molnar didn't know. Maybe he was trying to mislead us. I don't know. What I know is that we did not have a meeting announced until after school had closed for the year to the general public in the school district. Superintendent mentioned that he told school coaches. So of course some students in sports did acknowledge getting that, having knowledge of it. Other students didn't. And what the superintendent never mentioned is why would athletes get preference? Why didn't you tell advisors from various clubs? Why didn't you tell advisors from the honor societies? Why should only certain students get notified? So that hasn't even been discussed, and I don't think that's right. That said, the reason we're here is because consistently, and this is the third first reading we've had, is because each time the board has put into the policy things that just were not proper, or they didn't include things that were proper according to state regulations. So for example, in the first time there was a suspension involved, which of course is not permitted under regulations. This most recent time, some of the corrections included making sure that it was specified that the school nurse or school physician would take the test, because that of course is specified in the regulations. And there are a few other things mentioned, but there's a whole list of things that are supposed to be in the policy which are not clearly in the policy, or at least there's some ambiguity about it. For example, it tells about randomly picking students, and it gives an example of the sampling statistics, but it doesn't really say how that random selection will be made. It just says it will happen. It doesn't explain how it will be verified. It mentions the documentation of it, but doesn't really say how it will be verified, and that's required in the regulations. Then there's this mysterious reference to a bathroom in the policy. So it talks about the swab testing the students for drugs, but then when it goes on, then it says if there's a positive swab, there'll be a secured bathroom. It never says what happens in that bathroom. It doesn't say anything about the bathroom. It just mentions there'll be a secured bathroom. This policy should be made more clear. A parent should be able to look at it, a student should be able to look at it and understand what's going to happen. We shouldn't be relying on the representations of someone for things that aren't in the policy. And the reality is, you know, yes, technically it happened before, the notice was given before. I was given a copy of this policy this afternoon, but as the website indicates, it was only available this afternoon. Any parent that requested or saw the policy online before that would have had the wrong policy. They may not be here because they agree with the old policy, not the new policy. So I really think there's a rush being put on this for no good reason. And the board, I would support a vote of no, but if the board's going to continue, get the policy right. Don't have a policy that could be challenged. I think that's one of the reasons you were concerned and made the changes. If you have a policy that can be challenged, then it won't serve any purpose other than just maybe put a little more money in the pocket of the board attorney when they defend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pinkowitz. Just for your edification, Mr. Pinkowitz, this is part of the process. We have a first reading, we have a second reading. if, as you suggest, that there's so many people that are opposed to it, or you feel that it'll be opposed to it, there will certainly be other opportunities for them to hear it, speak about it. This is the first part of the process. And because we've gone back and revised it and reevaluated it and making sure that it's better, one of the things I committed to is that this was not going to be a policy that was going to be put in place and then forgotten about, that we were going to constantly revisit it and revise it. And I think we've shown that we are willing to go back, revisit, and revise. And every time we do it, we make it better. I also don't believe that policies are designed to be a 900-page document that tells every little detail of every little aspect of every nuance of everything that transpires. It's supposed to be a guideline. And I think that is. Now, if you feel there are things that need to be revisited again, please let me know. My 5 minutes are up. Thank you very much.
All right, well, just mentioned, there was no comment on why we're holding this meeting, public meeting early. And like I said, it doesn't mention urine testing at all, but that's implied, but not really stated. It's not stated where it occurs or anything. It just talks about a bathroom, which presumably is in the school, but it doesn't really say. The
Thank
policy
you.
needs to be.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Mr. Harris, sir.
We checked the website. It says 6 o'clock. There's no mention of 7 o'clock, and we did consult with our attorney regarding starting early. So we're...
It's on the board of meetings.
Okay.
The official notice of the meeting says 6 o'clock.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir, Mr. Molnar.
No, Mr. Pinkowitz does what Mr. Pinkowitz does best. He likes to go up and he likes to make an innuendo saying that was I misleading the public. I was at the first meeting when Dr. Zaga approached the President's Council, which is a board of all the PTOs throughout the township, when he first introduced that he wanted to start the language and the dialogue with the community about having a drug and alcohol testing. So he mentioned that from the very beginning, that it was to be a policy about drug and alcohol testing for students that were in sports, extracurricular, or driving. So, no, I wasn't trying to mislead anybody. We did have meetings. They might not be the meeting that you wanted to have because you want a meeting with 700 people there, and we would like that too. But unfortunately, all we could do was advertise the meeting, and you're never going to be happy with how many days we advertise. You're not ever going to be happy. So we could do the song and dance all we want. You will never be happy with anything this board does, and that's okay. That's all right. We're going to do what we feel is best for the students, for the safety of the students, and that's what we're trying to do. If I had a crystal ball, maybe we saved 4 or 5 children. You know what? Then it was worth it. If we don't have to go to 4 or 5 funerals, it was worth it. Now what are we going to do? We're going to put a price on it? If we only saved 6, it wasn't worth it. No, it's not the way it works. We do what we try to do, what's in the best interest of the students. You're not going to be happy with it. It's just the way it is. It's been this way for the last 6, 7 years you've been coming to this microphone. You will never be happy with what this board does. But like I said, that's okay. We're going to do what we think is the best for the students of this district.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Macaulay Williams, City of Woodbridge. The previous speaker, I think a lot of this stuff that he said has a lot of merit because, number one, it was advertised, but I don't think it was that well advertised. Personally, I stumbled across the email through like the hundreds of emails I got, and I was kind of shocked for the first time to actually know that there is a process in place. This is in the works. So I think we can better advertise it, that more parents are aware. I think a few days ago I was playing tennis with another parent who has a kid here in high school, and he was shocked too because he never really even knew about it. So I don't know how many the numbers are out there, but I think if we advertise it a little bit better, more parents can participate because parents want to be part of this process. I don't think parents are that busy, absent-minded, don't want to work with the school to get something that improve all of our lives, not just parents, not just teachers, the children, the community. I mean, there's so much moving parts to it. Also, I know at the last meeting, I don't remember who came up with this idea, but I know the board was asking for a lot of advice. And somebody mentioned the voluntary opt-in. I don't know if anybody remember that. And a lot of parents were saying, yes, we'll opt in if you have this policy that you know, you can test our kids. So I think also we should explore the opt-in process instead of having a process that says if children gonna participate in sports or the math club or parking, that now, hey, we gotta random test you. And secondly, I think, and I'm aware now that there's a reasonable suspicion policy, so I think this would complement the voluntary opt-in, that parents who are worried about their kids being on drugs and they're not aware of it, or as you said, it's gonna be 10% or higher. We don't know what the ceiling is gonna be. We know what the floor is, so I think that's another issue there. Like, how much people are actually gonna be tested in this program? You said 10% or more, and it's like 10% is over 400. 100% who participate in the school district, I think is from, if I can recollect correctly, is over 4,000 students. So I think parents want to know stuff like that. Also, I think we could look at the other school districts that are not having a voluntary testing program, especially the affluent district close to us, and see what's happening. Of course, yeah, there are kids who are, and as we know now, they're in our time and your time, growing up, there were less drugs. And there were less, like, what they're saying now, like drugs like heroin now is more pure. So that means for the first time, if you take a sniff or a shot or a shoot or God knows what, as a kid, and your immune system is what it is as a teenager, there's a good possibility that you're gonna die. But these affluent school districts, like Livingston, Short Hills, Milburn, they're not doing that to their children. So we should look at the reason why they're not doing that to their kids. And yes, some kids are dying and some bad stuff are happening, but I don't think we should just, we need a breathing time. We shouldn't just say, hey, let's just do this and save our kids, because we might have more worse consequences than we think it. Because, for example, and as I said, I don't know if my brain is still that good at what it is, but at that age, children experiment a lot. And some is peer pressure, but some is just children being kids. So you do this random test of a kid who is, for example, in sports or in the math club or whatever, and now, for whatever reason they made a mistake, it becomes a permanent record. No, it doesn't. And if this kid now is trying to go to Ivy League school or MIT, whatever, they might have to disclose that, and that could affect their chances. And I don't think that's the way we should put such a high price on a kid for making such a mistake. And that's what kids do. I mean, growing up, that's what kids do, that I knew as a kid. So I don't think it's changed now. Yes, there are more drugs, and we need to find a solution, but we have to be careful how we trot and saying we're saving our kids, but we might be causing other issues that we're not looking at carefully. I thank the board for the time tonight.
Thank you, sir. Just one clarification. Under this policy, if a child is tested positive, it does not go in their permanent record.
Well,
That's in the other policy.
well, I'm saying if you go, like say, apply to a school and they're saying, have you ever been reported to be under the influence of alcohol?
We don't report them. This is an internal thing.
No, I'm saying
So
they
if the
have
student wishes to lie, then yes, you're right. But I would think that the student could certainly also say, if somebody were to ask them if you've ever done drugs, they could either say yes or no as well.
Yeah, but sometimes the question they ask is more subtler. They might ask, have you ever been reported for being under the influence of X, Y, and Z? And we know this is a country that it's, even though they report something and say, hey, it's not going out, it's not going anywhere, we know it gets everywhere at times. So I'm saying, let's just look at more options and see the consequences of what this can have on
Okay.
the kids' future.
I just wanted to clarify for you what the policy said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes,
you
sir,
know
Mr.
what,
Mulner.
and I just might be old school. The policies geared towards students that play sports or involved in extracurricular activities, right, Dr. Zagan, through the chair?
Yes.
And driving, and the privilege of driving. When did we lose sight that playing on a sport or being in an activity at school is a privilege? It's not a right. Your right is to go to school and get your education. Anything you do on top of that is a privilege to represent your school. And I know kids will be kids, and kids try and experiment and make a mistake, but I can tell you as a parent, I don't want somebody experimenting and driving their car in the parking lot of a school while my daughter's walking across the sidewalk to school. And then, oh, God forbid, there's a terrible mistake. You know what? Do the right thing. Represent your school. Do it proud. I worked in the parks department for 28 years. I drove a truck. And you know what? I had to submit to random drug and alcohol testing because the employer came to me and said, you want to drive a truck? You want to work overtime when it comes up? This is what you have to do to have your CDL. And that's what I did. And we can't lose sight of the fact that participating in these activities is a privilege. And now, if the policy does go through, there's a stipulation. We're not out to ruin anybody's life. All we're trying to do is just to tell everybody, stay focused, do the right thing. If you're a sports star, your team needs you, do the right thing. That's all.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Board of Education President. Your name is
Jonathan's fine.
Jonathan what?
Treebwasser.
Treebwasser. Oh, I was here when Dan Harris was there. Council.
That's easier. I could switch with him.
No, it's okay. Considering what's going on here, Board of Education President Zega, hi, rest of the people. Name is Jerry Trabaka. I'm from Hopelawn, New Jersey. I kind of got the wind of this 2 weeks ago or whatever, and been able to come over here for public comment. A lot's been happening in the last 50 years when the only crack we had to worry about in school number 11 was the cracks in the sidewalk. And I don't have, it is a very serious decision you guys have to make here. It's rampant in all the schools across the country, and I just have a few questions here, and if you could answer them for me. Backpack searches and locker searches, have we been doing that on suspected kids and stuff like that, and to what age?
If it's under suspicion, we can, but if it's not, we can't.
Mr. President, Mr. Chewbacca, if the student is suspected to be under the influence or suspected to be carrying any controlled substance or weapon or anything that doesn't belong to school, yes, the district reserves the right to search their backpacks, search their lockers, and search their cars if they drove to school.
Okay, and to what age group, or does this go down to middle school? I don't, does it go to grammar school? How, you know, you hate to say this, but what How far does it go down in the school system?
All students, there's no distinction between grade level.
Okay, so it's not, it goes, it's K through 12, unfortunately,
Correct.
you're going to say on there.
Correct.
Okay. That's very good that you're recognizing that this is rampant in the school. The costs for testing or for suspicion and stuff like that, who bears the test? Is this an accredited system? Is it a random thing, or do we arrest the student or what to get him to submit to the test?
So the procedure is, the students who participate in the activities that would qualify for them for the pool, they have to submit in writing to be part of the random pool. So at a certain schedule, names will be generated randomly. I'm sorry, not names, student numbers will be generated randomly. Those students would be called down, administered what we have is a cheek swab test, and that would be administered by a nurse. And it's a swab, it's like a big Q-tip, they rub it in their mouth, and then they put it in a canister that has chemical indicators, and they will indicate the presence of drugs or alcohol. That's the initial screening. If a student were to test positive for that, then they would go to a more accurate, more intense screening that is done by a doctor at one of our doctors. To answer your question, the cheek swabs, they're going to be about $10 a piece.
Okay.
The subsequent lab testing in a doctor's visit, I believe that's around $60 for the lab visit. And that's something that all that is paid for by the district.
And this is being administered by the school nurse, or is she trained in this, or who does the...
She will be.
Okay, she will be.
We haven't gone forward purchasing the swabs yet because it's not a policy yet.
Well, I'm trying to find out here and stuff like that. You know, the students do have rights, and there's constitutional rights that we must abide by. I mean,
This
you guys
is all, it's all been tried in court, and it's all perfectly...
At one point, will the law enforcement or police department or the courts or any type of judicial thing, I think this gentleman talked about it, that since you are generating a file on this child, and I guess it does have to some degree of confidentiality?
Part of the policy is that it is confidential. It doesn't become part of the student's discipline file, doesn't become part of the student's regular file. It's a separate file that's not shared with the police or law enforcement or anyone else.
What if it's a recurring occurrence and the kid don't get the message, unfortunately? Does it attain a higher degree of severity, if you know what I mean?
The provisions of the policy allow for the counselor to recommend the treatment program. Could be anything from counselor visits to inpatient.
Is there any way these records can be expunged or any way to be downgraded that, you know, like if the kid does follow the program, like this one fellow said before me, kids do make mistakes, okay? And is there any process written into the record for this to be expunged if he does follow the
It doesn't follow anyone anywhere. It's a separate record from the school. Doesn't go to colleges, doesn't go to employers, doesn't go to the police. It's kept within the school. We have to maintain the records, but it's not sent anywhere. And that is specific in the regulation.
I find that very hard to believe that we are generating these records on these children in this digital data age when, you know, with the push of a button, you could get Donald Trump and President Donald Trump in Russia, what he was doing on that one day. And, you know, it's kind of scary. I do agree this has to be done. I feel that the records, they should be expunged after a certain length of time after they, after the child leaves the sphere of the Woodbridge education system on there. Hello? Hello. Yeah. You understand what I'm saying?
I'm sorry?
You understand what I'm saying? That
Yes.
the records should be expunged.
Sure.
And you know, these children will be on probation too, right? If they're
No.
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 No. So in other words, if they do test positive,
That's the policy for the violations for testing positive. The consequences are minimal.
Okay.
It's the mandatory treatment and counseling that's the important part of the policy.
and the treatment, the costs are borne by his family, or
Correct.
Right.
If they need
if
treatment.
needed,
Right.
if it's dictated, non-grant. Okay. Yeah, it's frightening, and I'm glad you guys are recognizing it, and, you know, I wish you well, and it's a daunting task. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Chewbacca. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak?
Through the chair, I
Mr.
wanted
Harris.
to ask yourself through Dr. Zega, student records, would this be an electronic record or would this be a paper record in a vanilla envelope? How is the record keeping, just for the public's edification?
Mr. President, Mr. Harris, this would not be an electronic record.
Okay, great. All right, be a paper
Would
record.
not
So
be.
an unhackable record,
Correct.
barring a fire or a theft.
And it will be disposed of in accordance with the law.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other comments? The board now closes the open public session, a hearing of this meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Dr. Zega, please state for the record superintendent's report for the month of June 2018.
Mr. President, I have the following reports to present to the board: the student registers and fire drill report, suspension reports for elementary and secondary schools, bomb threat reports, and the reports of the attendance officers.
Thank you, Dr. Zega. Dr. Zega, superintendent's agenda, please.
Mr. President, I have 20 items to present to the board.
Do I have a motion on the superintendent's agenda?
So motion.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public?
Island, just one question. So on item 5, it's talking about the NJ CUSAC, which I think that's done every year. Now it says you fell short by 3 points in one area in the instruction and program category. Is there any area or any specific areas the superintendent can share that needs to be in the district improvement plan that will be coming out in the next few weeks?
Dr. Zega?
Mr. President, Mr. Pinkwitz, yes, it was test scores is what it is, the park scores, and we are addressing those. We have some programs in place. I would like to note that the CUSAC has changed. This is what they call the old CUSAC. Next year, when we go through CUSAC, it'll be the new CUSAC, and the instructional program is a little bit more comprehensive than just test scores, and we're confident that we'll be above board on that.
Okay, I think that's it for that. Thanks.
I'd just like to make one more comment, and I don't know where to fall under here, but I understand there is a concern with homeless children, high school children in this district. So I wonder if the board could appropriate some money and some attention to that, because we know like homelessness, how myriad it can be, and kids being homeless in high school, not only drugs, but it's a myriad of problems. So if I see a lot of resources being appropriated here, can we also, at some meeting in the future, whenever, address the homelessness for high school children?
Sir, absolutely, but I believe it's addressed under the McKinney-Vento Act, which has certain requirements that we must meet as far as where a child lives, getting them to and from school, providing them a thorough and efficient education, making sure that they have breakfast and lunch if they are offered by the district, and pretty much providing them whatever they need to be successful in their school.
Well, I'm talking about having a shelter, a place like when it's winter, raining, that, you know, the appearance, kick them out on the street, that they could get counseling. I mean, something comprehensive that can save these kids like from drugs, because I'm sure when you random truck test them, and you find out all these problems from stress with drugs, they're gonna need it. So something more comprehensive, please.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Mr. Harris, policy and planning agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Policy and Planning Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, presents the following 4 items. You'll see 3 items on your agendas. We have one addendum, which I'll read with your permission, Mr. President. Whereas on February 25th, 2003, the School Ethics Commission adopted a resolution clarifying how school boards and charter schools must invoke the doctrine of necessity. And whereas on June 29, 2017, the Woodbridge Township Board of Education adopted a resolution invoking the doctrine of necessity. And whereas the board secretaries filed a copy of that resolution with the SEC, that's the School Ethics Commission, and whereas the SEC reviewed the board's June 29, 2017 resolution, and by way of letter dated July 26, 2017, directed the board to issue/adopt a revised resolution specifically identifying the name of board members' relatives causing board members to have a conflict under the School Ethics Act. And whereas on March 27, 2018, plaintiffs filed a verified complaint in lieu of prerogative writs questioning the legality of the SEC's July 26, 2017 directive, whereas the parties wish to resolve the dispute between them. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board approves the settlement agreement between the parties in the form, in the form previously submitted. Mr. President, I move the adoption of the foregoing four agenda items.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Tamburillo. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public?
All right, David Pinkwitz, Island. Regarding the last item first, so I understand what the complaint was about, I guess, the not including the names. What was the board's concern with the SEC's ruling? And then what is the nature of the settlement?
Mr. Pinkowitz, the board's concern was that it was unnecessary and unfair to call out the names of relatives who are not elected officials. They felt that it was sufficient to say that Mr. Smith has a conflict because his wife is a teacher in the district, or his husband is a custodian in the district, or whatever the conflict was. But they felt that it was unfair and unnecessary to say that his wife, Julie Smith, it was just kind of a ridiculous request, frankly, that the School Ethics Commission was making them perform. So we filed a complaint, and the School Ethics Commission came back and said, okay, let's settle it, and we are not going to enforce our directive to you, and you can continue doing it the way you've been doing it for years and years. That was the settlement.
Okay, thanks. Question, the testing schedule. This is probably related more to recent news regarding Park and I guess changes that are going through the process. Do we know if any changes are likely to occur in the administration of any of the exams during this school year? Or do we expect it by the spring? Or?
I don't believe, Mr. Pinkwitz, until we get official notification when it comes to the Park test, we have anything other than what we have currently.
Okay. Then a question on the public and executive session. So you've already heard my concerns about that. But one concern, which it's not covered in the policy, and I'm not sure how it would be handled. So in a public meeting, if someone comes in the middle, and typically the board president announces they're here, they go away, we'll see them go away, typically, whether they're announced or not. In the executive session, how is that anticipated to be handled? So obviously the public will not be present, just similar to the way if a board member walks in late, we might see them run to the back hall, but we're not going to see them go in the room. But how will we know if somebody, especially if they enter and depart before they come back out to the public?
So just so I understand you correctly, so in the middle of our closed session or our executive session, a board member who's entering remotely comes in the middle. Well, how would the public know? Well, they'll get it when we have our next board meeting and vote on the fact that the minutes are being made public. And the other thing is we have the board attorney would ask the person to certify that they were alone and by themselves.
Okay. And then just one general concern, and this is probably true for any debate, not just public or remote, is that when there's a vote on any particular issue, whatever the agenda item, like policy and planning right now, that someone be present if there's discussion for the entirety of the discussion, as opposed to walking in halfway, missing half the discussion, and then voting, which I think, they're not getting the full nature of it, and I think that's true. Closed session obviously is where the discussion happens for things that cannot be discussed publicly, but same basic issue. And then just real quick on getting back on the random drug and alcohol. I just wanted to read the portion of the announcement that I was given, and this is similar for both Island Middle School and JFK High School, which were the two forums I was invited to back in February. They each said, I'll read the one from Kennedy. The superintendent of the Woodbridge Township School District, Dr. Zaga, will be hosting a drug prevention parent forum at John F. Kennedy Memorial High School at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, February 15th, 2018. This is a casual meeting with parents and educators discussing drug prevention and ways we can help our children. Just to make the same point I made earlier, but was criticized, there would have been no way for any parent to really know. That particular one, the Kennedy one, came earlier than the other notifications. It came 2 days before instead of a single day before, like some of the others. But there really would have been very little a parent could know from that information where we were heading, or that they should go because they didn't like the way we were heading. That's it. And then the only other question, and this is more of a rhetorical question, but I would encourage the board to look at it. In the consent form, and it was mentioned during discussion about voluntarily submitting to be part of the pool, but I don't see anywhere in the policy where a parent could volunteer, and of course the board, the district shouldn't be spending money the board hasn't authorized. So if it doesn't say in the policy that somebody can volunteer, I'm not sure that somebody can volunteer to be part of the pool. And if that's the intent, again, revisit the wording. Take a look. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pinkowitz. On the policy and planning agenda. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Curriculum Committee, curriculum agenda, Mr. Harris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The Curriculum Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, present the following 18 items. I move the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sedana. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Finance and Insurance agenda, Mr. Tamburello.
Thank you. The Finance and Insurance Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and Business Administrator School Board Secretary, presents the following 19 items. This evening, I move for the adoption of the foregoing 19 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Tamburello. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Any comments or questions from the board?
Through the chair?
Mr. Harris.
Yes, I apologize.
No apology necessary.
Foremost, I apologize for my absence last month. I worked for the state legislature. It's a great privilege and honor. One of the things that I had the privilege of working on was 2 pieces of legislation regarding school funding. As you may be aware, Woodbridge Township is receiving an additional $3.5 million through this year's State Appropriations Act, and I want to very briefly thank my board colleagues for taking that money and applying it, what I feel appropriately and responsibly, towards some capital expenses, as well as, perhaps most importantly to many constituents, is tax relief. So I want to thank my colleagues and just make a special note of that. It's something I think all of us through the campaign trail over the many years we've been on the board. Property taxes is perhaps the #1 complaint we hear, and we've heard you loud and clear, and we're delivering on that request. So thank you, Mr. President, and to my fellow board members.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Are there any comments or questions from the public?
David Pinkowitz, Island. I just wanted to reiterate what Mr. Harris said. I almost missed it, but on item 17, I'm happy to see that there's some tax relief. And just to clarify, item 16, that's basically kind of carryover amount for our next year's budget. Is that, what is the increase, assigned fund balance? So what is that, just like basically extra money to sit there in case there's, am I on the right?
A third of it is for this current year, a third of it is for the following year. That's going to roll over into surplus, and then a third of it is going to tax relief.
Okay. So anyway, thank you for
Is
the board.
that the question you had?
Yeah, just to clarify. So that will be, so if in a theoretical possibility, which won't happen, expenses didn't increase, we'd have that extra money sitting there.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
And Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Technology, Mr. Sedana.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Technology Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, present the following two items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing two items.
I have a motion by Mr. Sedana. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public?
David Pinkowitz, Island. So both of these items, I don't know how many years they've been in place, but we've had Genesis for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Schoolwire, similar length of time. Has there been, well, first of all, has it been working as anticipated? Are there issues, problems that have been identified by staff, students, parents, anyone in the general community regarding either of these two items?
I think on the whole, everybody's been very satisfied with the way the systems work. As with any technology, there's always quirks and issues that pop up, and when they are, they're usually addressed very quickly and resolved. But just so you know, Genesis has probably been around since the mid-90s.
Oh, I don't think it was covered. I think because I had kids in elementary and then middle, I think it was only at the high schools at first. So I didn't
It was rolled out,
experience
yes.
it.
Okay.
All right. So the other question is, do we periodically, and I realize this is not out for bid because of the specialty nature of both these items, but do we periodically shop around and have, you know, somebody, the IT department or whoever would do such a thing, you know, test other alternatives to see if there's others out there? Obviously, when you're talking about for the coming year, no one would switch out, you know, a month before school, but in terms of like 2 years down the road, 3 years down the
You
road.
know, the problem with that, Mr. Pinkowitz, is Genesis has developed so many programs that are specific to our district and has worked to make our district function more as a single place where the base data lives. For us to switch over, like when we switched over from Asbury Park, it's many, many years to reevaluate and to get that done. Now, maybe down the road, that may be something that we want to visit, but right now, Genesis is a very cost-effective way. We saved thousands of dollars by pulling the financial and accounting software out of Asbury and putting it into our Genesis system. So as we keep realizing savings through economy of scale with Genesis, I don't know that it would make sense for us to now go out and reinvent the wheel and incur all those expenses again. But should something new and monumental pop up, I am sure our administration will visit it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything specific. I'm just suggesting that periodically, it might be every 3 years, every 5 years, we should just shop around. It doesn't mean we have to buy something new or replace. Obviously, that cost.
I appreciate your
the
position.
cost has to be taken into account, as you point out, but it doesn't mean if we never look, we won't know. And we won't know what we're missing or what we should demand of the current vendors. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
And Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Athletics and extracurricular, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Athletics and Extracurricular Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, presents the following 19 recommendations. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by, I think it was Mr. Delapietro. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Transportation agenda, Mr. Delapietro.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Transportation Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, present the following two items and move for the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Delapietro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Tamburello. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Are there any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Cafeteria agenda, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Cafeteria Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following 2 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Della Pietra. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietra?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
And Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Personnel agenda, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Personnel Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resource, presents the following. Tonight, I will be moving 21 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Harris?
Yeah, sure.
I have a second by Mr. Harris. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietra?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Ms. Murphy, do you have any recommendations this evening?
Not at this time, Mr. President.
Is there any old business that should be brought before the attention of the board? Is there any new business that should be brought before the attention of the board?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. Harris.
I just have 2 things I want to give a shout out to, as you used to call them. On the curriculum agenda, I was a little slow. Item number 13, I just wanted to recognize the administration, Mr. Bader, Mr. Zega, Dr. Zega, for this new agreement with Rutgers University to provide for a high school course for college credit with, in partnership with Rutgers University. Our first agreement with Rutgers University, the state university. We now have partnerships with NJIT, Syracuse, Monmouth University, Rider University, and Middlesex County College. These are real credits for our students, giving them a leg up when going off to pay for college. So I just want to thank the administration for that. Good job. And lastly, Mr. Pinkowitz had brought it up, the park changes. It's that beloved test that our students grades 3 through 9 are required to take. Our governor recently proposed making some significant changes, eliminating 4 of the high school tests, 2 language arts, 2 math tests, geometry and algebra 2. He also proposed reducing the amount of time that our elementary school students must take the park test, sit for the test. Currently, it's about 8 hours. It would be reduced to 6 hours under the proposal. And finally, one of the other major changes would be the portion of the evaluation that our teachers, grades 3 through 11, those who in tested areas, that's your language arts and your mathematics, currently as part of their annual evaluation, 30% of their evaluation is based on student performance on that test. It's largely been argued to be unfair. It's had a chilling effect on teachers who want to teach those particular grade levels, you know, it puts stress on teachers, for those teachers who teach perhaps students that are likely to underperform or perform below grade level, impacting a teacher's evaluation. So it's unnecessary stress, and I think there are terrific proposals. They go before the State Board of Education for approval. So those proposals were recently made, last week I believe it was. So only time will tell if the State Board of Education does approve those. But I have heard from parents and educators alike that the park is a tremendous detriment to our students. I've heard, and this is probably the best argument against the park, is that many students all year long, they hear about it, then they take the test and they feel as though the school year is over. And sometimes that is in April or May, and that's not exactly productive for our students or our teachers, for the students to be mentally checked out of the school year. So the park needs some updating, and those are some very positive steps in the right direction, and I hope they take hold. So I just wanted to give that update to the public and to the board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Is there any other new business? In keeping with past practice, we will open this portion of the meeting for statements from the public. If you wish to say something, please come to the microphone, provide your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D.
Good evening, Board of Education President, Dr. Zega, Jerry Trabalka, Hoplon, Trabalka. How's Ross Street School coming? Pretty good over there? They're on
Yes, sir,
schedule?
moving right along.
Yeah, everything like that. And I think I emailed Dr. Zaga and Dan over there about, having a tour of the place before you knock it down, and, make sure you save those artifacts and stuff like that, in there, because that's a lot of stuff. And you might even get a TV series out of it called Salvage Dogs, They could come in there and they could salvage the stuff out of that, and you get some notoriety out of it. Another thing I have on you, is this Board of Education aware that the Woodbridge Township has a proposal to put a parking deck in the vicinity of Ross Street School? Did you know about that?
Not at this time, sir.
All right, yeah, well, during the process of acquiring land and stuff like that, and you might want to latch up with the local councilwoman, I think it's Councilwoman Drum, and they plan on putting a parking deck in that area. It's just in the preliminary stages. It's adjacent to the Ross Street School, and they're coming up, and either they'll get the property through condemnation or they'll buy the property out. If you're familiar with the Ross Street Plaza over there on the corner, there's a building there. They did that 2 weeks ago. Now they're working on the gas station, and I think they're going to go lot by lot down to, you have property down there too, don't you? The Board of Education on the corner where all the staging is now? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about the corner of Main Street and Amboy Avenue?
No, I'm talking about Ross Street and Amboy Avenue. It's 400 and 410 Amboy Avenue on there. And that's the two properties that they're working on right now, and they're putting a proposal for, I guess it would be about 400 or 500 cars in there. That would be it's a rather large structure, and it'd be a prefab unit, and there might be retail space on the bottom. And I'm just putting this out to you people right now, and I don't know if you knew about it or not, but you might want to follow the council going on and get in contact with Councilwoman Drum and see exactly what's going on over there. A structure such as that does provide a security issue with the school, and if it is 4 or 5 stories, which I kind of suspect it's going to be, right, it's going to overwhelm the area. And like I said, security problems and other things and traffic for the thing. Has anybody heard about it, or this is just your first initial input on this? All right, well, I'm just telling you about it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll keep you guys informed, and, see exactly what happens over there, and consider a parking deck that big next to a school, what it's like. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, David Pinkowitz, Island. I just wanted to add a little more to what Mr. Harris said before. I think other areas where they were proposing changes were graduation requirements.
Right,
the graduation requirements, right, as of now for, I think it's the sophomore class and beyond, are that they must pass the park. And they're proposing to go back to what the current senior class has and what junior class has, which is the ACT, SAT. I don't know if it will be all the tests, but at least a few of them, that they could use that as an alternative. And obviously, it's a pretty big deal. They won't have to go back if they fail, let's say, Algebra 1. So like we have kids right now that have as a graduation requirement an Algebra 1 test they took in 7th or 8th grade. And if they didn't pass it, technically, they have to. But if this passes, they wouldn't have to. So I think it's probably a good thing if it happens. I have no reason to believe it won't. And then the other thing, I think they talked about changing the name of the test so we won't know it's Park. But that probably is not very important. Just wanted to quickly comment. So one of the concerns raised about me speaking earlier was that all I do is come up here and oppose the board. Now, of course, I don't speak on every issue, and many of the times when I speak, I'm simply asking a question and then sitting down without much comment one way or the other. And as the board notes itself, often there's very little discussion when the board is in agreement. There have been occasions where I've agreed with the board and when there was opposition. For example, when there was the referendum regarding solar panels, I did speak in favor of the referendum. I didn't stay quiet simply to oppose the board or to oppose the board or even go back to the board and criticize it for the referendum in the first place. You know, it's not, you know, I don't sit up here, you know, and I don't take it lightly when I come up here and when I express their facts. I've made sure I've researched those facts. You know, if we take you back in time, you know, there are times it's obvious it's my opinion, but there were times where it's less of my opinion and more of there's something going on here. When there was the allegations from New Jersey of cheating on the NJ-ESC, I pointed out after Dr. Librera's investigation that there was just simply no way that his investigation, which basically was similar to what our president did just this past week, where the guy said he didn't do it, so he didn't do it. I mean, that was the results of that investigation. But the reality is that while we didn't know what was wrong, and I certainly didn't personally know what had happened, it was fairly obvious from the statistics that there was almost no way that the cheating didn't occur in some form. And of course, when the state investigated, they found it. I opposed, now this was more of an opinion, and frankly, I was wrong about how badly it would work. There was a proposal to make a graduation requirement for community service. Yes, I did oppose it. I thought it was a bad idea. What I didn't imagine, because I couldn't imagine doing it myself, was that students would so blatantly ignore it and literally get to graduation day without having met the requirements, that the board was forced to basically ignore policy and later withdraw the policy in order for kids to graduate, or we would have lost significant numbers of all the graduating classes that year. And I spoke out against it. The board chose to go another way, but I don't think I was wrong to oppose it. And certainly, as it turned out, that was the end result anyway. So the idea that I come up here and take it lightly it's not true. I don't just come up here to oppose. But yeah, I'm not going to be here to slap you on the back and say good job every single vote you make either. It's just, you know, I speak when I feel it's necessary, especially when there's opposition to something I support. And I did speak, and I would have spoken with or without Mr. Molnar's comments earlier if I had noticed. I mean, you shouldn't bury tax relief on number 17 in the agenda just as a recommendation. But if it had been number 1, I would have seen it right away. Yeah, I would have made the comment anyway. So, you know, I don't have anything more to add. I just want to say I will continue speaking when I feel it's important. And, you know, whether I agree or disagree with the board, you know, I don't expect the board to agree with me. I do expect and rightly expect that if there's certain laws in place, for example, the nepotism policy, which the board didn't pass, but I pointed out, and eventually, you know, that was under the old board attorney in the old board, you know, the board back then. There's a few members that were on here then. You know, and I felt like I had to go to the county superintendent, and a month later, that's when the board started passing the policy, and not a second before. So I do consider it important. I consider it important that the board follows the rules, but I also consider, you know, I don't have to agree with everything the board does, and nor am I up here to simply oppose the board. I wouldn't bother coming just to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pinkowitz. Yes, sir.
Macaulay again. Well, I had 3 things, now 4. I'd like to commend you for your discussions because it's helped flesh out the issue, and it has personally educated me on a lot of the issues that's before the board. So I think, in my opinion, you serve a very important function, and I would like you to continue and not be deterred. Secondly, I like to commend the board. I personally like to thank the board for their gratitude, time, and sacrifice. I know at times you folks up there feel like it's a thankless job, but I think as a parent, I think you do a lot of good. Of course, a lot of the issues are very difficult, so between the parent and everybody else, it's gonna be a difficult job, and I thank you for your time and effort. Also, the teachers, I like to commend the teachers. I'm sure somebody said, I've heard it before, that the teachers are the one who educate our future leaders, and a lot of teachers here tonight, I like to personally thank them, and I think they're doing a great job. And it's a challenging society, and they're a lot of times the front line a lot of the social ills, and they're gonna see it, and it gonna pains them, and hopefully we can be supportive of as parents, and train our kids and educate them in a way that when they get into this school forum, they don't come in with drugs, in gangs, or also, just come in and learn and be respectable. And thirdly, I think that's the fourth point. I like that there be a volunteer funds for homeless kids, as I say again. I remember last year my daughter's, that's the first time I was exposed to it, that there's, especially in the Woodbridge school district, with high school children, there are quite a few homeless kids there. And I don't know what can be done to help them, but we know like if kids are homeless, they don't have a job, they can get into gangs very easily. The stress can put them into drugs, and they're gonna be very difficult for the teachers when they come into that environment to manage those kind of people. So I think we should put some attention to that area, and I don't know how I can get it on the board to, if other people see the problem and want to address it too, but I've heard it from a few people now. That's where now it caught my attention that there are quite a few high school kids that are homeless, and giving them food, that's a great start, but they're gonna need a lot more counseling, a lot more support, and it's gonna benefit not only the homeless kids, but the teachers. This would be something I'm sure, maybe someday these kids could even come up to the board and thank them for, because in that time where a desperation, like there's quite a few people in this society that's come out and say, especially, it seems as though the teachers, I don't know if they come to the teachers and identify themselves, or the teachers just spending 8 hours, sometimes more time with them than parents, acknowledge that they're homeless, but I don't think the teachers are equipped with the resources to deal with the issue. So I don't know if this is something that the board can wants to take up, but I think this could be one of the more happy moments where everybody say, hey, help a kid. You're not just saving a kid. You might be saving my kid too, because they're gonna interact with each other. They know each other. They know each other's problems, and it also becomes their problem, our problem, the teacher problem, and it's the board problem also. Thank you again.
I'll be happy to speak with you after the meeting if you like.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir, Mr. Molnar.
Just one quick thing. I don't want this to come across that, now it's being put out there that the board doesn't like when the public comes up to the microphone and questions us, or that's far from the point. We encourage the public to come to the meetings. We want the public to come to the meetings. I think this board over the years have tackled some very, very difficult issues, and we did it together as a community. And that's the thing, working together, trying to achieve a goal. I think some things kind of get taken out and get personal in this whole thing. And some attacks and innuendos are made personal. And I think every board member here could agree with me that it's happened that way. But to sit here to make it sound like this board doesn't like when people come up and question us, or that's what the part of the governmental process is. We sit up here as the elected official. You have the right to come to a meeting, ask a question, or bring to our attention an issue that's going on that needs to be addressed. And you work together to reach that goal. So I just don't want it to be left that, you know, the board doesn't like when somebody comes up to the microphone and criticizes them. That's far from the truth. I mean, we deal with children, and we deal with, you know, it's very, very emotional for parents when we do things that affect their school. But like I said, we try to make our decision for the whole district, not just for one individual. We try to do what's best. And that might affect the child in a different way than it affects another child. So by that parent coming to the microphone, we don't want to run away from that. We encourage that. That happens. But we'll sit down, we'll have a dialogue, and we'll try to work together as a board in the community to, you know, come across, you know, to solve an issue. I remember this board not too long ago when Governor Christie first got elected and slashed this district millions of dollars. We had to come together as a community and get rid of the cafeteria workers, get rid of the custodians. We had to make deep cuts. And you know what? We met, we talked, we had a dialogue. And that budget failed that year because it was still an elected budget, but it didn't fail by a lot because we sat and we talked. So I don't want the public out there to get the impression that we don't want anybody to come to the meeting. I would love to see 9,000 chairs filled out there. You know, some of the meetings were basically brought to the public's attention by way of the instant alert. You know, and I know a lot of people were saying that, you know, we didn't get it, we didn't hear it, this, that, and the other thing. But when the Honeywell comes in, or the instant alert comes in and says, due to inclement weather, school is postponed tomorrow, everybody gets it. So it's one of our ways of communicating, other than knocking on doors. So, but I don't want anybody to get the impression that we don't want people to come to the board meetings. We would love to have everybody come to the board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. You're right. I know you're not afraid of us. That's for fact. John Vertarik, Woodbridge. There's a couple of things over here. Since last meeting, we talked to a lot of people about it, and there are a lot of impression about the drug testing is only done to the people involved in the sports and a couple extracurricular activities. And again, personally, I hope it's not true that anybody should be involved because, like you said yourself, it is an emergency. We got a problem here. But I'm reading over here that the drug testing, that's going to be, students be selected at random, but their parents would be notified prior to the testing. My question is, how much before, number one? Number two, if the student doesn't come to school, then other students are going to be selected to take its place. How about their parents? When the parents going to be notified? Same day, couple of days before, or whatever it is?
They are not notified days before. They are notified just prior.
You mean the same day? So that's a great idea because in case of a, you know, we know the situation is if the kid is on certain abstinence, I mean a certain thing, and the parents know about it, more likely would not tell them to go to school that day. So I do agree with it. Please do something. And the question was raised last time, if it's going to work. Let's hope it's going to work. But if it doesn't work, at least we tried. The rest is not on us. We can't go later on and find out we could help such and such a person. This, how many times you hear, if only parents say, if I know this, if I know that, it's too late. If you can do it before, I think it's great. And I hope it goes through. I don't know if you went for it or not. But another thing goes over here, questions before by Rose Street School. And last year, I believe Dr. Zega was asking what's wrong with the school. Rose Street School is not, the rooms are too small. My question is, do we have enough parking for the new school? If we don't, that's maybe what's the question. The mayor wants to put a parking lot over there, which I don't think you could do that. If it's not for school, there's no other reason, or you cannot take a property for the eminent domain. So in your knowledge, I'm sure you saw the plans, do you have enough parking for the school as it is?
I believe according to the plans, there's enough parking, but according to Mr. Chewbacca, we're golden now. There's going to be plenty of parking.
No, well, if, again, no, you see, there's a different thing. If you want to take the property eminent domain, only thing you have to take the piece of property from the private citizen is if the property is for schools or public use.
Mr. Vitark, I have no idea about eminent domain. That has nothing to do with us. The plans say that there's enough parking for the building, but Mr. Chewbacca said they're building a parking deck, so it's even less of a concern.
They're not building.
How they build it is none of my issue.
They're not building, but I mean, it's not, to your knowledge, it's nothing to do with the school.
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Just keep the drugs test. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi. Good evening. Dan Grossberg, Island. Hope your guys' summer has been going well. So a few months ago, as you guys all know, there have been some issues at School 18 with the mold and the asbestos, and at the time, you guys engaged with some experts and got the recommendations that the source of the problem was much bigger that could not be addressed at the time. That included fixing the flashing, the drainage, and a number of other issues with the school. And from, if memory serves, that was going to be worked on over the summer. So I'm here to find out what kind of work has been done, what will be done before the school is in session. I saw that a bid was awarded for the asbestos and whatever that word is, remediation for next year. So that's great that it's being addressed, but I'm curious as to what's been done so far.
Mr. Wolferman?
We have an ongoing process now of fixing the exterior of the building. That's already in progress. We've started the interior of the building. One of the classrooms, the roof is being replaced, the ceiling is being replaced in one of the classrooms. We have additional classrooms and hallways on tap for the summer as well.
Now, when you say work is being done on the outside, can you be a little bit more specific, like what kind of work is being done?
There's going to be replacement of the flashing, new stucco and siding above where the window areas are, and it's all done to prevent water from entering the building, to prevent any mold going forward.
Okay, got it. And there was mention of, excuse me, hiring an architect to have like these big plans, you know, longer term. Has that been?
The architect is the one who designed the plans that we are currently doing on the exterior of the building, and we also have a consultant that does the interior for asbestos contamination as well as mold.
Got it. Okay. And we're anticipating this to be completed before school opens in September?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Projects that we're currently working on, we expect to be done before the beginning of school.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
And if any of it comes in less than what we initially anticipate, we'll try to get more accomplished.
Is there anywhere to go to get like a full scope of you mentioned the projects that are currently underway. Is there anywhere where we could see like what the full scope of those projects are?
There's one on the website. That's the phases and the prioritized rooms. Now, tonight, we passed the bid for the asbestos cleanup. So now, and that's a T&M bid, so we'll be able to get those people, get prices on how much each room will cost. The 1/3 of the extra aid that was put in this year's budget will certainly help toward paying for all those repairs. But I would like to, the outside, the exterior, that was the big project we talked about. That's a $260,000 project going on the outside to prevent the moisture from coming in. Yeah, it's if you look on the website, it's there is a plan for the prioritized work in each classroom in the interior. You also notice, I was over there today, actually, they started milling up the playground. We are going to, the mayor and the town council are replacing the playground surface.
Sir, were you looking for the exact scope of the exterior work?
Well, just further detail as to what that entails, more than...
So certainly you can contact the business office and request that information.
Great. Business office. Okay, thank you very much.
Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So motion.
Motion by Mr. Harris, second.
Second.
second by Mr. Molnar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Meeting adjourned.